This is Lucky Mommy, single mom of 3 teenagers, and welcome to my chaos. I started to realize pretty early on that my own insufficiencies would be a pretty significant player in my parenting, and that I had to be really self aware and intentional. But first, I had to, mess around and find out, right? So today, I'm thinking about some of the things that I put in place to manage my own insufficiencies. I tend to be a pretty spontaneous person. I am moved to do things in the moment. And when I'm inspired by something, I can absolutely get lost in it and lose time. Kid two, on the other hand, has always needed a certain amount of order in his life. As a baby and a toddler, he was the child that got really frustrated in moments of change and of transition. So effectively, my core traits are profoundly incompatible with his. So I would tell them, it'll be time to clean up in 5 minutes, right? I'm managing their expectations. And then I would get lost in a project. And so sometimes 5 minutes was 10 minutes, and sometimes 5 minutes was an hour. And so when I came back and I'd say, okay, it's time to clean up, I'm rushing them because it's time to move on to the next thing, kid two would get really confused and really frustrated. And so for a while, what I perceived as moving on to the next exciting thing, he really perceived as these abrupt disruptions. And our transition relationship was incredibly frustrating. So one day I had an epiphany. Kitchen timers. So if I set a timer for them and a timer for me, then we could all learn what 5 minutes really was. So I got a couple kitchen timers from Dollar Tree, and eventually I had a whole basket of them that sit on my kitchen window. And I learned to regulate myself. And I also was able to better manage kid two's expectations. And for visitors in my house, I think this probably seemed really strange, right? That I was controlling everybody with timers, right? But it really did reduce the crying and the frustration, and it made me more consistent as a parent. So really everybody wins. It wasn't about regimenting things, right? It wasn't that I needed everything to be just so. It was really more about making sure that I wasn't letting them down and holding them hostage with my super weird sense of time, right? So now I have teenagers and I still have a basket of timers on the windowsill, and I use them, they use them, and they're really helpful for us to manage our daily functioning. We've gone beyond managing transitions, and we found that the timers are really helpful in general. So if I say go throw a load in the wash, they'll set a timer so that they remember to go back down to get the laundry out. And when we have 4 people doing laundry at the same time, specifically on Saturday and Friday, which is our sort of focus chore time, it's easier for us to manage the flow and keep everybody aware of when the laundry, when the washing machine is available and able to kind of move through the process. So the timers create efficiency for us and really always have from when the kids were really small. And now we can, do what you need to do, set a timer, move on. Don't think about that thing that you were working on, and then come back to it when the timer reminds you to do it. So I asked a couple of friends about what are some of the things that I do that are weird around sort of navigating parenting life. And a few of them mentioned my lists. And you've heard me talk about lists a few times. I always have so many things going on in my life, so many things that I want to do, that I'm working on right now, that I need to remember, that it actually would be really easy for things to slip through the cracks, right? And so I've learned to not try to hold everything in my brain. My brain is focused on being creative. What do I want to do next? What's my new idea? What do I want to build, right? And so the list of to-do items or things I need to think about at some point really does need to live somewhere outside of my head. I read somewhere where you should keep a notebook next to your bed so you can write down the things that are keeping you up. And then it's easier to sort of calm yourself and go to sleep because you've put it somewhere where you know that you will remember it and you'll be able to get to it. And now you can relax. So when I think about that, I picture Harry Potter where Dumbledore has the pensieve, and he takes the memories out of his mind and he puts them in a bowl, and then he can kind of swirl them around and he can process them and really sort of think about, like, why is this important? What do I need to do with this information? And then he puts it in a vial for later. So in my life, the bowl and the vial are these lists that, really sit everywhere. Once the Luckey kids were able to read, it was natural that I would transition this behavior to them, right? And so there was a point when they were younger where there were whiteboard stickers on the walls in every room in our house. There were to-do lists for the kids and myself, shopping lists, morning, after school, and bedtime lists. All of the different things that we needed to kind of regulate, we had on lists on walls around the house. So raising independent kids meant that I needed to give them the tools to manage their time on their own. And the lists meant that they could never say, well, I didn't know, or you didn't tell me to do that, right? It was all very straightforward and very clear. And then building the routines meant that they could learn habits, and eventually the lists would no longer be necessary. And I'm still waiting for the day that the lists are no longer necessary. So now they have phones, and we have shared apps that allow me to update and check on progress in real time. And so I've mentioned before that I'm a huge fan of the Cozy Family Organizer app. And I love this app for a lot of reasons. We're all logged into the same interface. I can color code the kids. And as you know, the color coding is a really important aspect of how I manage my house, right? I can have multiple lists for each person. And so, for example, we have a section of travel lists. And each one of us has a checklist of everything that we need to pack when we're getting ready to go for a trip. And the reason it makes sense for each of us to have our own lists is I don't need to be responsible for packing everybody's bag. Each person can be responsible for their own, right? So my list is red, and I've got all the things that we need for a family trip, as well as the things that I might need for an individual trip. Baby girl's list is purple. She needs to make sure she has her EpiPen whenever she's traveling. So depending on the type of trip that we're taking, the list of things that we need might be different. But there's definitely a core list of things that we need for every trip. One thing that's cool about the Cozy list is that they can be categorized into different sections. So we can manage the details of our process, and I don't have to be involved in every detail of getting them ready. So the sections that I have for the packing list would be, one is what to wear on travel day. So that's usually a hoodie, t-shirt, jeans, socks, and sneakers, right? Socks because when you take your shoes off at the airport, you don't want your feet to be bare, and sneakers because that's the biggest pair of shoes you're going to take, and so it's better to have them on your feet than packed into a bag, right? The second section is what to pack in their backpack. So this is what you're carrying around with you taking on the plane: a book, games, chargers, snacks, hand sanitizer, those kinds of things. What goes in your suitcase? So this is where your clothes are, your toiletries, and any sort of additional things that you need to have for the trip, right? But a list so that we don't get there and realize, oh, I brought everything except underwear, right? And then finally, what goes in your wallet? So I have, medical insurance cards for each one of the kids, but I hold on to those. And if they're taking a solo trip, then we need to make sure that they've gotten that and their passport or their ID to take with them as they're traveling. So it's nice to be able to have those different sections so that we can manage the different pieces of, what you're packing to get ready to go. And then at the same time, in my list, I have all the things that I want to double check to make sure that we don't forget. So baby girl's EpiPen is on her list, but it's also on my list. So one of the last things that I check before we leave is, does she have her EpiPen? And then at the end of my packing list is a section for what I call last things to do, right? Turn off the lights, set an eco-friendly temperature, lock all of the doors and windows, make sure there's no clothes in the washing machine, those kinds of things. So all those things that I want to make sure that I remember before we leave the house, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to forget a few of those if I'm relying on my brain. And so instead, it's in the list. I can check that before I leave the house, and I know that I have a clean, error-proof, repeatable process. Their chore lists are in the same app, right? And they're organized around the order that I want things to be done and how things should be grouped together. So here we have sections again. So kid 2 has laundry at the top of his chore list, and kid 1 has laundry later in his list. And that organizes the flow so that they're not all battling to get to the washing machine at the same time. The person who has it first on their list is going to be the first to put laundry in. And then when they get finished, they'll let the next person know, and we kind of go from there. Sweeping the floor happens after the dishes, wiping off the counter and wiping off the table. Because if you sweep the floor first and then you wipe all the surfaces, then you end up just wiping stuff back on the floor. And so really organizing things in a way that the flow makes sense means that they learn the routine and they are more intentional about doing things in the order and the way that they're supposed to be done. In the last few years, we have also moved into more smart devices. So between our phones and like smart devices in our house. So now I can say, add kale to the shopping list, and the house will do that, right? And if the kids use the last of something, they can say, add milk to the shopping list. So we've smartened the house so that the list can be managed in real time. And I find that to be really helpful. When I get ready to do grocery shopping for the week, we're not trying to figure out like, what do we need? What are we out of? Those kinds of things. Like when we run out of something, it goes onto the list. And then I can efficiently do the grocery shopping and accommodate everybody's, wants and or needs, as we're doing it. One of the things that I realized some years back on the grocery piece was I was ordering the exact same things every week. And at some point, I realized that like we were keeping certain things in stock, but we weren't necessarily using them regularly. So our deep freezer was full all the time and our pantry was full all the time. But there are certain things we're circling through and other things we just weren't. And so the behavior around shopping wasn't efficient and it wasn't really consistent with our daily needs. So I stopped grocery shopping for a whole period of time, except for like milk and produce. And I focused on making meals out of the things that we had in our pantry and in our deep freezer. And the goal was to run out of everything, right? To get through all of the stock and to start fresh. And then once we did that, we got a lot more intentional about meal planning. And this is not a huge exercise, right? I do a quick check-in with the kids on Friday and Saturday and, a couple questions. What are you making this week? Is there anything you want me to make this week? And do we have all the ingredients we need to make that? So then when I do the grocery shopping, I'm being intentional about the food that we need in the moment and that we plan to prepare this week. So to recap, my sense of time, super wibbly wobbly. So raising kids who need more structure meant that I had to build in coping mechanisms to really force myself to be a little bit more regulated. My brain is constantly creating and coming up with new ideas and trying new things. So in order to make sure that the things that actually need to be done are being done, I rely heavily on lists. And the Luckey kids can use those lists to make sure that I'm delivering on what they need. I can easily fall into routines and follow patterns. So it's important for me to step back and occasionally reevaluate to determine whether the pattern I'm following makes sense for our daily lives. And finally, admitting that I'm the one creating the frustration was a big step towards figuring out how to pull myself out of the process and reduce the frustration in our house. Your action items for this week. Think about the coping mechanisms that you have developed in your life to manage everyday activities. How you organize your space or your time at work, how you manage relationships, and other spaces that you've created order in your life. Look at your interaction with your children and consider whether your own idiosyncrasies are having an impact on the sense of calm and order as your children learn to navigate the world. Consider whether routines, timers, lists, and other tools would help you to create that calm both for yourself and for your kids. And share in the comments ways that you reduce frustration in your home. Let me know how it goes. Comment with questions, feedback, and new topics. Like, subscribe, share, and follow me on Insta at Luckey Mommy. And thank you for joining me in this quest to raise a thriving future generation. I'll see you soon.